Australia's worst commercial bird flu outbreak began on a single farm near Meredith on May 22, 2024, and spread through 8 Victorian poultry operations in 4 weeks. By the end of June, more than 1.5 million birds had been destroyed across the state. The 2024 H7 outbreak across Victoria, New South Wales, and the Australian Capital Territory ultimately saw 1.8 million birds culled, according to NSW DPI. For Victorian poultry farmers in the Golden Plains Shire and the Corangamite Shire, the consequences were immediate. Flocks built up over years were depopulated within days. Farm gates were locked under control orders. Movement of birds, eggs, manure, feed, and equipment was banned without permits. And one of Australia's largest listed egg producers, Farm Pride Foods, lost 36% of its egg production capacity in a fortnight. This is the story of how a wild bird virus reshaped the poultry industry in Western Victoria, what it cost the producers who carried that burden, and where Victorian farms now stand more than a year after the eradication response began. Agriculture Victoria, a branch of the Victorian Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, was notified of a suspected outbreak at a poultry farm near Meredith on May 21, 2024. Detection was confirmed the next day. Testing at the Syro-Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness at Geelong identified high pathogenicity H7N3 at the Meredith property. Within 4 weeks, tracing and surveillance activities had identified 7 more infected premises. 7 of the 8 Victorian properties tested positive for H7N3 in the Meredith region of Golden Plains Shire. The 8th, a chicken farm in the Tauranga region of Corangamite Shire, tested positive for a different strain, H7N9. The farms affected reflected how concentrated Victorian poultry production is in this stretch of country. 3 were mixed free-range and cage egg layer farms. 2 were free-range egg layer farms. 1 was a pullet-rearing barn-style farm. 1 was an indoor barn layer farm. 1 was a commercial duck egg and meat farm. Golden Plains Shire produces about a quarter of Victoria's eggs. The location of the first detection was not incidental. Meredith sits about an hour west of Melbourne and hosts many commercial egg and chicken meat sheds. The infected duck farm near Meredith was a smaller operation of around 40,000 birds, but represented around 2% of Australia's commercial duck population. Victoria's then Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Graham Cook, said the goal was containment. He warned that if the virus was allowed to spread onward, it would be devastating for the rest of the poultry industry in Victoria and perhaps onward through Australia. Dr. Cook said the 7th infected premises had been picked up on early surveillance and could be dealt with quickly. Movement restrictions were placed across a control zone that spanned roughly 100 kilometers from west to east, covering 6 of the 7 H7N3 farms. A restricted area covering a 5-kilometer radius was established around the Tauranga farm, with a 15-kilometer buffer zone. A separate restricted area covered the Meredith and Lethbridge properties, bound by Bacchus Marsh Road in the east and the Colac to Ballarat Road in the west. The cull was rapid and large. By early June, Agriculture Victoria had confirmed 160,000 birds destroyed at the Tauranga farm. 2 farms operated by Avgo and Surf Coast Eggs farms in Meredith and Tauranga euthanized about 500,000 birds after testing on May 22nd. By June 19th, more than 1 million birds were being destroyed across 7 Victorian properties. On June 25th, after the 8th Victorian detection, the figure had climbed to around 1.5 million. The 7th infected farm alone housed between 150,000 and 200,000 egg-laying chickens. The 2024 Victorian outbreak was more than double Australia's previous worst commercial outbreak, the 2020 event in Victoria, which had destroyed over 400,000 birds. For producers, the financial consequences were direct. Farm Pride Foods, listed on the ASX, was hit hardest. The company first confirmed that its Lethbridge aviary site, holding around 80,000 free-range hens, was positive for H7N3, the same strain found at Meredith. That alone represented about 8% of total egg production capacity. A week later, Farm Pride confirmed its Rock site in the Lethbridge area was also positive. That added another 240,000 birds, or about 24% of total production capacity. Combined with the earlier detection, the outbreak had taken 36% of Farm Pride's egg production capacity offline. The company said it would seek compensation from Emergency Animal Disease Compensation Scheme and launched a 6.2 million Australian dollars rights issue to support working capital through the recovery. Chairman George Palacianos said the funds would be applied to supporting the company's working capital during the recovery from the impact of avian influenza on the Lethbridge farms. The rights issue was underwritten by Willow Heights Proprietary Ltd., an entity associated with Palacianos. Farm Pride's full-year FY24 revenue still rose 23% to 101.85 million Australian dollars. But the disruption forced operational reviews, cost cuts, and a sustained period of reduced output. Farms outside the Lethbridge area continued to operate. The company said it would be managing operations to limit the impact on customers and consumers during the period of reduced egg production. For the smaller operators inside the Meredith and Toronto control zones, the picture was different. Compensation under the Emergency Animal Disease Compensation Scheme covered stock losses, but the work of cleanup, decontamination, restocking, and waiting on new pullets remained. Layer hens take around 18 weeks to mature before they begin laying. For producers who lost flocks in May and June 2024, the income gap stretched well into the following year. The surrounding rural economy carried a secondary impact. Inside restricted areas, permits were required for movement of birds, poultry products, feed, and equipment on or off properties. Acting Chief Veterinary Officer Dr. Cameron Bell, who later managed the 2025 response, told producers that even selling or giving away eggs from their own properties was banned without a permit. That restriction touched every business connected to the affected sheds, including feed mills, transport operators, packing facilities, and contractors who service the farms. Turosi Food Solutions Group, which operates the Golden Farms processing facility at Breakwater near Geelong, sits in the same broader production region. That plant employs around 400 people. The wider Geelong food processing sector employs a significant share of the regional workforce. While there is no research confirming direct knock-on losses at those processors, the proximity gives a sense of how concentrated the supply chain is and how much regional employment sits within the radius of those movement restrictions. For Victoria's chicken meat industry, the outbreak landed during a year that had been difficult on other fronts. According to data, as of June 2024, Victoria is Australia's third largest poultry producer by value at 957 million Australian dollars. Australia's overall gross value of poultry production was estimated at 4.2 billion Australian dollars. Victorian autumn 2024 rainfall ran 46.6% below the 1961 to 1990 average, the ninth lowest since 2008, with maximum temperatures 1.15 degrees above average. Those conditions compounded operating pressures for farms already responding to a biosecurity emergency. Detections in Victoria stopped after June 24, 2024. On September 12, the restricted areas around Meredith and Toronto were lifted and replaced with control areas. The federal government continued the eradication response through to the new year. On February 3, 2025, the Australian government announced the 2024 H7 outbreaks had been eradicated. The relief did not last for Victorian producers. 5 days later, on February 8, 2025, the Syro-Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness confirmed high pathogenicity H7N8 at a commercial egg-laying farm in Euroa, in northern Victoria. The laboratory advised the strain was not linked to the 2024 outbreaks. A new restricted area was established around the property, with a control area covering the eastern portion of Strathbogie Shire, including the townships of Euroa, Violet Town, Longwood, Ruffey, Avenel, and Strathbogie. Within 5 days, a second Euroa property was confirmed through tracing. By February 20th, a third property. By late February 4th, Dr. Cameron Bell said the proximity of the properties meant the new detections were not unexpected, and that Agriculture Victoria staff were on the ground working closely with industry to contain and eradicate the virus. Agriculture Victoria declared the Euroa outbreak eradicated on June 13, 2025. The pattern of detections, Meredith and Toronto in 2024, then Euroa in 2025, meant Victorian poultry farms were operating under emergency response conditions for the better part of 13 months. For some producers, that meant 2 waves of biosecurity pressure within a single financial year. The 2024 outbreak alone destroyed more than double the number of birds lost in the 2020 Victorian event. The The 2025 Euroa response added 4 more affected properties on top of that. The industry response moved on several fronts. Farm Pride raised capital and undertook an operational review to navigate reduced egg output during the recovery. Compensation flowed to affected producers through the Emergency Animal Disease Compensation Scheme. At a national level, the Australian government in July 2024 announced $6.9 million Australian dollars for bird flu surveillance and potential vaccine investigation. Of that, 70,000 Australian dollars was earmarked for research into the link between low pathogenicity H7 in Australian wild birds and the high pathogenicity outbreaks in domestic poultry. A broader 100 million Australian dollars package was announced for H5 preparedness, and over 1 billion Australian dollars has been pledged to strengthen Australia's biosecurity system over 4 years. The Syro-Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness at Geelong continued to perform advanced genetic analysis on samples, with the centre noting it can now turn results around in hours rather than days or weeks. As of mid-2026, all of Australia's H7 outbreaks since 2024 have been eradicated. For Victorian poultry farmers, that means the immediate emergency has passed. But the financial recovery for affected producers continues. Replacement flocks have to be reared. Clean sheds have to be restocked. Capital raised during the outbreak has to be repaid or recovered. And the underlying conditions that brought the virus to Meredith in the first place, wild waterfowl carrying low pathogenicity strains into commercial farms, have not changed. Industry submissions and federal investment continue around vaccination research, surveillance, and biosecurity preparedness. For producers in Golden Plains, Corangamite, and Strathbogie, the work of returning to full operation continues more than a year after the first detection at Meredith. If you found this report useful, subscribe to stay across what is happening in Australian agriculture. We will keep reporting.